Eli Gold, and you're watching the Pigskin Palace.
The SEC is one of college football's biggest conferences. There's no doubt about that. It seems like every other year a team from the conference is coming home with the national championship. I mean, think of some of the biggest brands in college football right now. LSU, Texas, Alabama. These are all schools that come from the SEC. Well, at least Texas nowadays. But one thing is for certain, the SEC isn't going anywhere. A common talking point every year by some is that the SEC is slowly starting to lose its identity as the powerhouse conference. ESPN regularly hypes the SEC up to look practically unbeatable every year. There are always guys trying to lobby why SEC teams with worse records than non-SEC teams should make it into the playoffs. The SEC currently has the most amount of NFL draft picks, with the Big Ten being right behind them. Between the addition of schools outside the normal geographical landscape, the evening of the playing field of college football thanks to NIL and the transfer portal, and the expanded playoffs, there is concern that the SEC might fall off the road in favor of the Big Ten. I mean, the Big Ten already has more national championships than the SEC all time, though not by a lot. While they are still home to some of the best teams in the sport, one can only wonder what will happen to the SEC if the landscape of college football continues to change. Before I go into this next section, I want to go ahead and add a quick disclaimer. You see, I'm going to be talking about a lot of teams since the beginning of the SEC's history all the way up until the current day. In doing this, I'm also going to be mentioning all of the national championships that the schools are credited for by the sports writers. This will also include all national championships that have not been claimed by the schools. I'm including all of these in there because I wanted to kind of show off how often the SEC wins, because when these teams were awarded the national championship, they were typically undefeated or only had one-loss records. So I'm just throwing those in there to showcase how often the schools were winning, not necessarily to flex how many national championships that schools could have but really don't. I just want to kind of put it into perspective so you get an overall idea of how often the schools are winning. With that being said, let's go back to the very beginning of the SEC. The year was 1894, and several Southern schools attended the organizational meeting for the Southern Intercollegiate Athletic Association, one of the first conferences in American collegiate athletics. This conference was designed to keep the scheduling of the sport at these schools consistent, basically just making it to where the schools would all play each other for most of their games. The conference continued to grow over the years, adding dozens of schools that made the conference feel way too bloated. On top of that, the SIAA tried to enforce really stupid rules like having no freshman players and things of that sort. This caused many of the teams to leave the SIAA, and in 1921, Alabama, Auburn, Clemson, Georgia, Georgia Tech, Kentucky, Mississippi State, and Tennessee left the SIAA to form the Southern Conference, along with non-SIAA members Maryland, North Carolina, North Carolina State, Virginia, Virginia Tech, and Washington and Lee. The Southern Conference added 6 more schools before its official start. These schools were Florida, LSU, Mississippi, South Carolina, Tulane, and Vanderbilt. Things officially kicked off in 1922 when it was announced that freshmen still couldn't play. Alright then. The first season ended with 3 undefeated teams, those being Georgia Tech, North Carolina, and Vanderbilt. Alabama and Tulane ran the table for the next several years, with each having several undefeated seasons and claimed championships. By the early 30s, schools were starting to grow frustrated with how big the conference had become, citing concerns that resembled those from the SIAA. It was always hard to crown a true champion amongst the schools since half of them never played each other due to how many there were. Some schools wanted less strict rules, while some wanted more. Some schools wanted there to be less teams in order to establish a better regional identity. The writing was on the wall, so in 1932, 13 teams separated themselves from the Southern Conference. The Southeastern Conference was born that year, consisting of former SoCon schools Alabama, Auburn, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, LSU, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Tennessee, Vanderbilt, Sewanee, Georgia Tech, and Tulane. The conference got its first official headquarters 8 years later, located in Jackson, Mississippi. The first national champion under the SEC was Alabama in 1934, followed by back-to-back championships by LSU. This trend of SEC schools dominating the college football world continued throughout the decade. By 1940, Sewanee had left the conference due to dropping all of its athletic scholarships and becoming a D3 school. By 1948, the SEC headquarters would be moved to Birmingham, Alabama, where it still is to this day. By 1950, the SEC was home to some of the most powerful brands in football. They faced an uphill battle, however, as they had to compete with the likes of other powerhouse schools like Ohio State, Notre Dame, Michigan, Army, and Oklahoma. The SEC was being beaten over the head throughout the decade by the northern schools, with Georgia Tech and Tennessee doing a lot of the heavy lifting. This would eventually change, however. One of the more influential signings would happen in 1957 when Paul Bear Bryant left his head coaching job at Texas A&M to join his alma mater in Tuscaloosa, who had been struggling for quite a bit. Bryant's previous success put the other SEC teams on notice, which led to schools investing in better facilities, coaching staffs, and recruiting. Here we saw LSU be recognized for a title in 1958, Ole Miss in 1959 and 1960. Bryant got his first with the Tide in 1961. Bama, Ole Miss, and LSU were recognized in 1962. Bama claimed two for 64 and 65, and was recognized for a third in 66. Tennessee was recognized in 1967, as was Georgia in 1968. During this time, Georgia Tech had left the SEC due to Bear Bryant over-signing players, which the school thought was unfair. Tulane also thought they weren't that good at football anymore and wanted to put their finances towards academics instead, leading to their eventual dropout. The 1970s was the decade of the Bear because holy cow, Alabama was absolutely unstoppable. The SEC had become riddled with good teams, but no team could stop the dominance of Bear Bryant. In fact, Alabama was the only SEC team to be recognized for any natties throughout the entire decade, being declared as national champions in 1973, 75, 77, 78, and 79, before the streak was finally broken in 1980 when Vince Dooley and the Georgia Bulldogs took home a national championship. Bear Bryant retired from coaching in Alabama in 1982 before passing away a month later in January of 1983. The top heaviness of the SEC started to dwindle down now that the conference's most powerful guy was no longer with us. Auburn and Florida were each voted for a national championship in 1983 and 1984 respectively, and that was the last time we would hear about national championships in the SEC throughout the 1980s. The SEC had some pretty good teams going into the 90s, and even added Arkansas and South Carolina as members in the early decade. But the conference really started to rattle some cages in 1992 when they held the first ever conference championship game. The first SEC championship was played at Legion Field in Birmingham between Alabama, led by Gene Stallings, and Florida, led by Steve Spurrier. The Tide won the game in a close battle and proved themselves worthy of playing in the first ever national championship game, which was also that season. Alabama beat Miami and got the first unanimous national championship for the SEC since Georgia did it in 1980. Also, from this point on, I'm only going to start counting national champions that won the national championship game, since that is now a thing starting in 1992. 1996 saw Florida taking home the gold, followed by Tennessee winning the first BCS championship in 1998. There was a little bit of silence for a few years, and with this, the conference had something to prove. The turn of the millennium was a prime moment for things to shift in college football, and boy did they ever. The first BCS winners out of the South for the decade were the 2003 LSU Tigers led by Nick Saban. 2004 and 2005 were quiet for the conference, but the next 7 years were not. This is where most of the SEC powerhouse talk in the modern day stems from. The stretch between 2006 and 2012 is when the conference had an absolute chokehold on America. Just about every team in the conference was a team you didn't want to mess with. you had Florida take home the gold in 2006, LSU in 2007, Florida again in 2008, Alabama in 2009, Auburn in 2010, Alabama in 2011 and 2012. The SEC was destroying literally everybody all the time. Even Auburn had a chance to win another one before they lost to Jameis Winston in Florida State, finally ending the streak. Texas A&M and Missouri had now joined the conference, making the playing field even harder. The reign of terror, like I said already, finally came in 2013 when Auburn lost the final BCS championship to Florida State, giving the ACC its first natty since 1999. In the age of the college football playoff, Alabama and Clemson would play hot potato with the title for a few years to bump this stat up for both conferences. LSU would win the CFP in 2019, kicking off a 4-year streak with Alabama and Georgia winning the titles until 2023. Fast forward to now, and Texas and Oklahoma are added to the mix, with Texas being one of the best teams in the country during the time of this video's publishing. This brings us to the modern day. The last 2 national championships have been won by schools from the Big Ten Conference. People are starting to wonder if the SEC is plateauing and losing its proclaimed dominance from the media. Is the SEC losing its identity? No. As you saw throughout the video, the SEC has had many ups and many downs. Some of these periods even come by the decade. I'll be honest, when it comes to the identity for the SEC, I don't even think it's what the media portrays it to be. Sure, it has dominant teams and definitely has potential to win natties every 2 to 3 years, but let's look at the facts. The conference and all power conferences are super top heavy. They, for the most part, have always been and always will be top heavy. The 2000s and 2010s were a dominant time for the conference, yes, but I think that our recency bias of living through that has kind of plagued our minds a little as far as the future goes. I think that the SEC will be like all the other conferences in the future. You win some, you lose some. That's just how it goes. In a world where transferring is encouraged and NIL is used as a recruiting tool, the playing field is just more even now. There are more teams that can fight for a postseason bid. That's just how things go. And with that, the statistical probability of an SEC team winning the national championship goes down by default, just like it does with every other conference. In terms of brand identity, the SEC still hosts some of the most iconic brands in the sport, and that's not going to change. The recent additions of Texas and Oklahoma are only broadening this. Just because ESPN is pushing the SEC to be the Champions Conference doesn't mean that it is or ever was. The SEC will always be the conference of tradition, barbecue, and Dr. Pepper. Those Dixieland Delights and Sandstorms, those live Tigers and Rocky Tops, those are what makes the SEC. The SEC's identity will always be based in the culture surrounding the fans, the schools, and the tradition of watching college football with the occasional natty thrown in there. Thank you guys for watching another episode of the Pigskin Parrot. Week 1 of college football is officially this week. I know I'm excited. I know you guys are excited. And I'll be getting more videos for you soon that are more topical, just like this one was today. Thank you guys for supporting the channel in the ways that you have. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Hit that little bell icon next to the subscription button so you can get notifications for all the upcoming Pigskin Parrot videos. Just 2 videos ago, I was at about 160 subscribers, and we have jumped up tremendously, exceeding 700. We are so close to my first 1,000, and I am very grateful for all of you guys' support. Don't forget to follow the official Pigskin Parrot Instagram page. I've linked that down in the description below. And hey, come follow me on Twitter. I'm always talking about different things, whether it be things happening in the US, things happening with college football, things happening with wrestling. I don't know, what are you into? I don't know. I'll talk about it on Twitter. I talk about everything on Twitter. So be sure to follow me on Twitter. I've gone ahead and placed that in the description as well. Let's have a successful college football season. May the best team win. My name is Preston McElhaney. Thank you for watching.
And we welcome you once again inside the Georgia Dome. Sellout crowd of 72,000 gathering here as Alabama comes in as the defending national champions. The Georgia Bulldogs won national title. That was 32 years ago. You might say this is the most important game that the Bulldogs have played since then.